investing in ETFs is a great way to get exposure to global markets, which allows investors to diversify their portfolio, especially that country-specific risk. Joining me today to talk about a recently launched e-commerce ETF is Kevin Carter, founder of the FMQQ Next Frontier Internet and Ecommerce ETF. First of all, Kevin, welcome. Tell us a little bit about this fund. Tell us a little bit about FMQQ and what's the theme you're trying to capture here with this ETF?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So FMQQ is a relatively recently launched fund that tracks the emerging markets, internet and e-commerce sector. So there are 46 emerging and frontier markets. We include all of them in our definition of emerging markets. And our flagship fund, EMQQ, invests in all 46 of those countries. But the largest part of that has always been China, for good reason. China's e-commerce market is the biggest in the world by far. And what FMQQ does is it excludes China. So it invests in all emerging and frontier markets, internet companies beyond China. So we're talking about India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil, Nigeria, Turkey, those sort of places. And it's the same thing that we've seen here. The FANG stocks, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Googles, these businesses have taken over a large part of our lives for good reason, the smartphone. And that same thing's happening in the rest of the world too, but it's a lot earlier. And there's a lot more people in the developing world than there is in the developed world.
So with FMQQ excluding China, is that because potentially you're less optimistic about their future growth? Or is it just because you think there's so much more to offer elsewhere and you want to kind of focus on that at the moment?
Well, I'm certainly not worried about China's continued growth. And I'm also not worried about the regulatory fears that have gripped the market about China. I think China is going to continue to do just fine. But the reality is that its e-commerce market, as I said, it's the most developed in the world. Think of this, China's e-commerce market is 4 times bigger than the other 45 emerging and frontier markets combined. So the FMQQ countries have 4 times as many people as China, and China's e-commerce penetration is 25%. So 25% of retail sales are now e-commerce in China. In the FMQQ countries, it's less than 5%. So you've got 4 times as many people. It's 1/5 as penetrated. So I think investors can expect decades of very, very strong growth in the FMQQ companies.
So leaving China aside, within that fund of yours, which countries do you think have the most opportunity at the moment?
Well, India has the biggest opportunity. I mean, India is going to have the largest population in the world within just a few years. And they're way behind where China is now, but they're catching up fast. You have, every 3 seconds in India, somebody's getting their first computer in form of a smartphone, which is also giving them their first internet access. And they don't have a bank account with a debit card. They don't have a cable TV on the wall, and there's no Target store. So all of these people are leapfrogging, and India clearly is the largest opportunity in terms of people, but it's really everywhere. I mean, if you look to the left and right of India, you have another 500 or 400 million people in Pakistan and Bangladesh. Indonesia's got another several hundred million people. Brazil, Africa, all of these places, they have entrepreneurs, most of whom have either worked at Amazon or Google or one of our tech leaders. They've gone to our best colleges, to Harvard or Stanford, and they're going home, they're getting venture funding, and they're starting the localized versions of the things that we've seen take over our lives. So India, definitely the largest opportunity. It's really everywhere. And the deeper we dig into the private part of the story, the number of unicorns and decacorns and soonicorns it's exploding, and it's going to continue. There's going to be hundreds of these companies publicly traded not too far in the future.
So you were talking there about Africa, a bit of Southeast Asia, also Latin America. They're all included in the index. Could you talk to us a bit about the leading companies in those regions?
Sure. Well, I would say first is the company that really, one of the companies that really inspired EMQQ, our original fund, and certainly FMQQ, and that's Mercado Libre, which is an Argentinian company trading on the NASDAQ here in the United States. And it's the e-commerce and the fintech leader in all of Central and South America. So the database and the fact sheet will show you Argentina as the country weight, but half of that business is operating in Brazil. Mexico is the second largest part of that business. But it's in Costa Rica and Guatemala and places that don't even have a stock market. So they're not even included in the list of emerging and frontier markets. And Mercado Libre, in addition to being the e-commerce leader, it's also the fintech leader. And that's really within the FMQQ story, the strongest sub-story is fintech. It's financial services. As all of these billions of new consumers leapfrog, the bank account with the debit card, and in a lot of these FMQQ companies, because they launch, for example, a ride-hailing app, but nobody has a digital payments platform, or nobody has a digital form to pay. So a lot of these entrepreneurs have launched these businesses with a cash component to the payment, and then they build their own fintech payments platform to enable people to convert their cash and use it in a digital way. And then as their ride-hailing business or their e-commerce business scale, as in the case of Mercado Libre, so too does their fintech business. And all of a sudden, they have the largest payments platform in the region, and that allows them to get into banking, to investment products, to insurance. So the fintech part of the story, and Mercado Libre is really the best example of the FMQQ companies. But C Limited, which trades on the New York Stock Exchange with the ticker SE, this is a company based in Singapore. So the fact sheet will show Singapore, but the revenue is coming from all over Southeast Asia. As their name indicates, it's in Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia. And this is a company, C Limited, it's been one of the best performing stocks in the world over the last few years. Now, the market's in a little bit of a sell-off recently, but it was neck and neck with Tesla as the best performing stock in the world. And it doesn't have a US or European equivalent. It's a combination of three different apps, three different businesses. It's got a gaming app in partnership with Tencent. It's got a fintech and payments app. And then it's got a shopping app called Shopee. And Shopee is a runaway success, and it's expanding beyond Asia. It's now actually getting close to the leading market share in Brazil with its app. So those are the two best examples, but there's so many of these. We just had the Brazilian, the largest online bank in the world, Brazil's Nubank, which went public last month on the New York Stock Exchange with the ticker NU. This is a company backed by Berkshire Hathaway before they went public. And then also more recently, the Indian fintech leader Paytm went public. US investors probably didn't see that IPO because it went public in India, but it's a big deal. I mean, the fintech is going to be huge in India. It already is, but it's got a long, long way to go. And that's the leader. And in the case of the two most recent IPOs, Nubank and Paytm, they've both seen pretty big declines in their stocks since they went public. So the market's definitely not in a good mood, but the valuations around FMQQ are very compelling, and the growth is going to undoubtedly be there for years and years.
Great. So just to finish off, for anyone that's looking to now start getting into e-commerce, how would you say FMQQ differentiates from any other fund that is potentially tracking something like the MSCI Emerging Markets Index?
Well, there's nothing else like FMQQ right now. That's not to say that somebody might not make one, but What differentiates it, and this is very important for investors, the MSCI Emerging Markets Index is a terrible index if you want to make money with your investments. I mean, yes, it does track all of the publicly traded companies in emerging markets. Actually, that's not true. It tracks most of the publicly traded emerging markets companies. But the problem is that includes about a third in government-owned banks and oil companies. These are not real companies in terms of, trying to grow value for shareholders. And you have corruption that's rampant. I mean, the last two presidents of Brazil have gone to prison for basically stealing your money if you're investing in the MSCI index, because that index includes the Brazilian state-owned oil giant Petrobras, which was looted basically by people, including those last two presidents of the country. And if you counted the oligarchs that took over the Soviet SOEs and the chaebol in Korea, it's half the index. And, if you look at the returns of the MSCI index over the last 15 years, the return is basically zero, nothing, a decade and a half where you made no money. And the biggest problem is those state-owned enterprises. And the second biggest problem is that most of these internet companies and e-commerce companies, they end up trading in the United States, and or they're established and organized in countries like Singapore or Argentina, which mainly because they trade on our exchanges, the indexes don't include them. So our two biggest holdings, Mercado Libre and C Limited, the two that I mentioned, they're not in the MSCI index. So you get the government-owned banks and oil companies, you get a lot of those, but you don't get these entrepreneurial, high-growth internet and e-commerce companies, which are really defining the future of how these billions of people consume in the developing world.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for giving us these wonderful insights on the recently launched e-commerce ETF. If you wish to invest in this and many other ETFs, head to IG's investments